Staff Sergeant Maria Santos pushed the mop across the concrete floor of Naval Base Norfolk, watching the dirty water swirl in patterns that reminded her of smoke clouds. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in that familiar military gray that made even the brightest day feel dim. Her hands, calloused from years of real work, gripped the mop handle as she moved methodically through the hallway outside the command center. "Look at Santos," came a voice from behind her. From explosives expert to janitor, how the mighty have fallen. Maria didn't turn around. She knew that voice belonged to Petty Officer Jenkins, a man who'd made it his personal mission to remind her daily of her current position. But what Jenkins didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Maria Santos had requested this assignment. She had her reasons. The laughter that followed Jenkins' comment stung more than Maria cared to admit. 6 months ago, she'd been one of the Navy's most decorated explosive ordnance disposal specialists. She'd defused bombs in 3 different countries, saved countless lives, and earned respect that took years to build. Then came that night in Afghanistan. One split-second decision, one mistake that cost her everything. "Hey, Santos," another voice joined in. This time it was Seaman Rodriguez, barely old enough to shave, let alone understand what real combat looked like. "My grandmother could mop faster than that. Maybe you should consider a career change to housekeeping." The group of sailors erupted in laughter as they walked past, their polished boots clicking against the floor Maria had just cleaned. She watched their reflections disappear around the corner, then continued mopping. Each stroke was deliberate, controlled, the same precision she'd once used to cut the right wire at the right moment to save lives. Maria Santos hadn't always been invisible. Growing up in East Los Angeles, she'd been the daughter of a mechanic who taught her that anything could be fixed with the right tools and enough patience. Her mother, a nurse who worked double shifts, had shown her that strength came from serving others, even when no one noticed your sacrifice. "You're wasting your talents here, Maija," her father had said when she'd enlisted at 18. "You could run my shop someday." But Maria had bigger dreams. She'd scored highest in her class on mechanical aptitude tests. Within 2 years, she'd volunteered for EOD training, explosive ordnance disposal. The most dangerous job in the military, the job that meant the difference between going home alive or in a flag-draped box. For 8 years, Maria had been the best. She'd earned her reputation by being fearless when others hesitated, precise when others rushed, and calm when others panicked. Her hands had diffused everything from roadside bombs to sophisticated devices that could level city blocks. She'd saved hundreds of lives, maybe thousands. Then came that night 6 months ago. The memory hit her like it always did, sudden and sharp. The marketplace in Kabul, the device hidden under a fruit stand, the timer counting down faster than expected. The choice between saving herself and saving the family of 4 huddled nearby. Maria had made her decision in less than a heartbeat. She'd thrown herself over the device, absorbing the blast that should have killed her. But sometimes surviving was worse than dying. The blast had damaged her hands. Not visibly, they looked normal enough. But the nerve damage meant she could never again trust her fingers with the delicate work that explosive disarmament required. One tremor, one moment of uncertainty, and people would die. The Navy had offered her a medical discharge with full honors. She'd refused. "I'm not done serving," she'd told Admiral Harrison during their meeting. "Find me another way." So here she was, mopping floors and emptying trash cans while men half her age made jokes about her fall from grace. What they didn't understand was that Maria Santos had chosen this position for a reason. Naval Base Norfolk wasn't just any base, it was home to some of the most sensitive operations in the Atlantic Fleet, and Maria had noticed things during her months of cleaning that others had missed. The way certain visitors lingered too long near restricted areas, the pattern of security rotations that left blind spots, the maintenance schedules that seemed just a little too convenient. Maria might not be able to defuse bombs anymore, but her eyes and mind were as sharp as ever. "Santos." The sharp voice of Chief Petty Officer Martinez cut through her thoughts. "Admiral wants to see you in the command center. Now." Maria set down her mop and straightened her uniform. Martinez was one of the few people on base who treated her with any respect, probably because he'd served long enough to know that everyone had a story. "What does he want with the cleaning lady?" Jenkins called out, still lounging against the wall with his group of followers. "Maybe she's getting promoted to bathroom duty," Rodriguez added, earning another round of laughter. Maria walked past them without a word, her boots making no sound on the floor she'd just cleaned. She'd learned long ago that actions spoke louder than words. And sometimes the people who underestimated you the most were the ones who gave you the greatest opportunities to prove them wrong. The command center buzzed with activity as Maria entered. Officers moved between computer stations, their voices low and urgent. On the main screen, she could see satellite footage of what looked like a cargo ship approaching the Virginia coast. Admiral Harrison stood at the center of it all, his gray hair perfectly styled despite the late hour and his face carrying the weight of command. "Sir," Maria said, snapping to attention. Admiral Harrison turned, his weathered face serious. "At ease, Santos. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." Maria nodded, wondering why her heart was suddenly racing. Around them, the command center had gone quiet. Every eye was on her, and she could feel the weight of their attention like a physical thing. The Admiral's next words would change everything. But at that moment, Maria Santos, former explosives expert, current floor mopper and woman who'd been written off by everyone around her, had no idea that her moment of redemption was about to begin. Admiral Harrison's eyes swept across the command center, taking in every face before settling back on Maria. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. On the main screen, the cargo ship continued its approach toward Norfolk's waters, and Maria could see something in the Admiral's expression that made her stomach clench. "Santos," the Admiral said, his voice carrying the authority of 3 decades of naval service. "Your personnel file shows you were EOD, explosive ordnance disposal. Is that correct?" The question hit the room like a thunderclap. Every conversation stopped. Every keyboard fell silent. Maria felt 20 pairs of eyes burning into her, and she could practically hear the thoughts racing through their minds. "The cleaning lady used to handle bombs?" "Yes, sir," Maria replied, her voice steady despite the chaos in her chest. 8 years active EOD before my current assignment." From somewhere behind her came a snort of disbelief. "Right," Jenkins muttered, not quite quietly enough. "And I used to be a Navy SEAL." Admiral Harrison's sharp gaze found Jenkins immediately. "Petty Officer Jenkins, I suggest you research Santos's service record before you embarrass yourself further. Staff Sergeant Santos has more commendations for bomb disposal than anyone in this room." The silence that followed was deafening. Maria kept her eyes forward, but she could feel the shift in the room's energy. Confusion, disbelief. And from some quarters, "The first stirrings of respect, sir," came a voice from the intelligence station. Lieutenant Commander Walsh, a woman with sharp features and sharper instincts. "We're getting more intel on the cargo vessel. It's the Maria Estrella, registered out of Panama but with a crew manifest that doesn't match Port Authority records." Admiral Harrison nodded grimly. "Put it on screen." The main display changed to show detailed intelligence reports. Maria's trained eye immediately picked out the inconsistencies. The ship's manifest showed it carrying textiles and electronics, but the weight distribution was all wrong. The draft of the ship suggested a much heavier cargo than what was listed. 3 hours ago, Admiral Harrison began, addressing the room but keeping his attention on Maria. "We intercepted communications suggesting this vessel is carrying more than textiles. Our intelligence indicates the presence of military-grade explosives, enough to level half of Norfolk if detonated properly." The room went cold. Maria felt her hands clench involuntarily, the old familiar surge of adrenaline that came with bomb threats. This was what she'd lived for during her 8 years of active duty. The moment when everything hung in the balance and only her skills stood between life and catastrophe. "Sir," Walsh continued, "Coast Guard intercept teams are in position, but we have a problem. The ship is maintaining radio silence, and our thermal imaging shows activity in the cargo hold. If they're rigging explosives for detonation, they could turn that ship into the world's largest floating bomb," Admiral Harrison finished. "And if they detonate while approaching the naval base, the casualties would be in the thousands." Maria's mind was already working, analyzing the situation with the same systematic approach she'd used in combat zones around the world. Cargo ship approaching port, unknown quantity of military-grade explosives, potential for mass casualties. It was exactly the kind of scenario she'd trained for, lived for, and ultimately sacrificed her career for. "Admiral," came another voice from across the room. Commander Peterson, a man whose soft hands and desk assignment had never brought him close to real danger. "Surely we have qualified EOD personnel on base who can handle this situation." Admiral Harrison's expression darkened. Commander, our primary EOD team is deployed in the Mediterranean. Our backup team is conducting training exercises in North Carolina. The nearest qualified bomb disposal expert is 4 hours away by air, and we may not have 4 hours. The weight of the situation settled over the room like a blanket. Maria could see it in their faces, the realization that they were facing a crisis with potentially inadequate resources. And she could see something else. The growing awareness that the woman they'd been mocking for months might be their only hope. Sir, Jenkins spoke up, his voice lacking its earlier confidence. With respect, Santos hasn't worked EOD in months, and frankly, we don't know why she's not working EOD anymore. The comment hung in the air like a challenge. Maria felt the familiar sting of judgment, the assumption that her current assignment meant she'd somehow failed. What Jenkins didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Maria could have returned to active EOD duty at any time. The Navy had offered her positions at every major base in the world. She'd turned them all down. Admiral Harrison looked directly at Maria. Santos, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need a direct answer. Are you physically and mentally capable of handling explosive ordnance disposal? The question cut straight to the heart of Maria's personal hell. She looked down at her hands that had once been steady enough to cut wires while bombs counted down, hands that had saved more lives than she could count. The nerve damage from that blast in Kabul had left them with the slightest tremor, barely noticeable to anyone else but potentially fatal when working with explosives. Sir, Maria began, then stopped. Around her she could feel the weight of expectation. Lives hung in the balance, and she was the only person in the room with the experience to make a difference. But was she willing to risk everything, including other people's lives, on hands that might fail her at the crucial moment? On the main screen, the cargo ship continued its steady approach toward Norfolk. The timer in the corner showed they had less than 2 hours before it reached the harbor. 2 hours to decide whether to trust a washed-up former bomb expert or watch thousands of people die. The truth is, Maria said, her voice growing stronger, I requested my current assignment after an incident in Afghanistan. I sustained nerve damage to my hands during a blast. Nothing that affects daily activities, but when working with explosives, she trailed off, letting them draw their own conclusions. The room erupted in murmurs. She'd just confirmed their worst fears. She was damaged goods. Unreliable, potentially dangerous, so you're telling us, Peterson said, his voice dripping with disdain, that our only available EOD expert has nerve damage? That's supposed to make us feel better about this situation. But Admiral Harrison held up a hand for silence. His eyes never left Maria's face. Santos, I'm not asking whether you're perfect. I'm asking whether you're capable. Because right now you're all we have. The moment stretched between them like a taut wire. Maria could feel her heart pounding, could feel the weight of every life that hung in the balance. She thought about the family in Kabul, the ones she'd saved by absorbing that blast herself. She thought about the months of mockery she'd endured, the assumption that she was washed up, finished. And then she thought about the thousands of sailors, families, and civilians who would die if that ship reached Norfolk with its deadly cargo intact. Admiral, Maria said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade, I'll need a boat. The words hung in the air like a battle cry. Maria Santos, the woman they'd dismissed, mocked, and written off, had just volunteered to single-handedly board a ship loaded with enough explosives to flatten Norfolk. The command center erupted into chaos. Admiral, you can't be serious, Peterson protested, his face flushed with disbelief. She just admitted she has nerve damage. This is insanity, sir, Jenkins added, his earlier mockery replaced by genuine concern. With all due respect to Santos's past service, this is a suicide mission even for someone at full capacity. But Admiral Harrison's eyes remained locked on Maria. In them, she saw something she hadn't seen in months. Trust. Not the blind faith of someone with no other options, but the calculated confidence of a commander who recognized real competence when he saw it. Santos, the Admiral said quietly, are you absolutely certain about this? Maria straightened her shoulders. Sir, I've never been more certain of anything in my life. The next 30 minutes moved like a blur of controlled chaos. Intelligence reports flooded in about the cargo ship, Maria Estrella. What they learned made the situation even more dire. The vessel wasn't just carrying explosives, it was carrying military-grade C4, enough to level 6 city blocks. Worse, thermal imaging suggested the crew was actively working in the cargo hold, likely rigging the explosives for detonation. Best case scenario, Lieutenant Commander Walsh reported, her voice tight with tension. They're planning to detonate once they reach the harbor. Worst case, they're setting up a dead man's switch that goes off if anyone tries to board. Maria absorbed this information while suiting up in the equipment bay. The familiar weight of tactical gear felt strange after months of carrying mop buckets and cleaning supplies. But as she strapped on her utility belt and checked her tools, muscle memory kicked in. This was who she was. This was what she was meant to do. You don't have to prove anything to us, came a voice from behind her. Maria turned to see Chief Petty Officer Martinez approaching. His weathered face showed genuine concern, not the skepticism she'd grown accustomed to. With respect, Chief, Maria replied, adjusting her vest. This isn't about proving anything. There are thousands of people who go to sleep tonight thinking they're safe. I won't let them down, Martinez nodded slowly. For what it's worth, I looked up your service record after the Admiral mentioned it. 3 bronze stars, 2 purple hearts, and 47 confirmed explosive devices neutralized in combat zones. That's not the record of someone who gives up easy. The words hit Maria harder than she expected. For months she'd felt invisible, defined only by her current assignment rather than her years of exemplary service. Having someone acknowledge what she'd accomplished, what she'd sacrificed, meant more than she could express. Thank you, Chief, she said simply. The boat ride out to intercept the Maria Estrella took 23 minutes across choppy Atlantic waters. Maria sat in the bow of the high-speed interceptor craft, checking and rechecking her equipment while the Coast Guard crew prepared for what might be their last mission. The night was moonless and the cargo ship appeared on the horizon like a dark ghost against darker waters. There she is, called out Petty Officer Kim, the boat's navigator, dead in the water just like Intel said. Maria studied the vessel through high-powered binoculars. The cargo ship was massive, nearly 400 feet long with multiple cargo holds. No lights showed on deck, but she could see heat signatures moving around the superstructure. The crew was definitely still aboard and active. How do you want to play this? Asked Lieutenant Torres, the Coast Guard team leader. We could try to board amidships or... No, Maria interrupted, still studying the ship. Look at the waterline. See how she's sitting? The weight distribution is all wrong for the cargo manifest. Whatever they've got in those holds is concentrated toward the stern. That's where I need to go. Torres followed her gaze and whistled low. That's also where we're seeing the most thermal activity. If they've got lookouts, then we'll have to be smarter than they are, Maria replied. The approach took another 15 minutes of careful maneuvering. The Coast Guard crew proved their worth, bringing their vessel alongside the cargo ship's stern with barely a whisper of sound. Maria could see rust streaking down the hull and smell the mixture of diesel fuel and salt water that marked a ship that had seen better days. I'm reading 5, maybe 6 heat signatures on deck, Torres whispered into his radio. Santos, you sure about this? Maria was already moving toward the rope ladder they'd secured to the cargo ship's rail. I've boarded hostile vessels before, Lieutenant. The trick is not being there when they expect you. But as Maria began her climb up the side of the Maria Estrella, her enhanced hearing picked up something that made her blood run cold. Voices speaking in rapid Spanish, and among the words she caught were temporizador, explosivos, and una hora. Timer. Explosives. 1 hour. Whatever the crew was planning, they were running on a deadline much shorter than anyone had anticipated. Maria hauled herself over the rail and onto the deck, immediately moving to the shadows cast by a cargo crane. Her training kicked in. Stay low, move quiet, assess the situation before acting. The deck of the cargo ship was a maze of shipping containers and equipment. Maria could hear voices coming from the direction of the main cargo hold, and what she heard made her stomach clench. They weren't just planning to detonate when they reached harbor. They were planning to detonate in exactly 1 hour, whether they'd reached port or not. Maria pressed herself against a container and activated her radio. Command, this is Santos. I'm aboard the vessel and we have a bigger problem than we thought. Go ahead, Santos, came Admiral Harrison's voice through her earpiece. They're not waiting for the harbor, sir. I'm hearing Spanish conversations about a 1-hour timer. They're planning to detonate soon regardless of location. The silence on the radio stretched for several heartbeats. Maria could picture the chaos erupting in the command center as they realized the timetable had just accelerated drastically. Santos. The Admiral's voice returned, tighter than before. Can you assess the explosive situation? Maria was already moving, using the shadows and her knowledge of ship layouts to work her way toward the cargo holds. What she found when she peered through a porthole into the main hold nearly stopped her heart. The entire cargo area had been converted into a massive bomb. Hundreds of blocks of C4 were wired together in a configuration that would create a blast visible from space. But worse than the quantity was the sophistication of the setup. This wasn't the work of amateurs or terrorists. This was military-grade engineering, designed by someone who understood explosive demolition as well as Maria did. And at the center of it all, counting down with red digital numbers, was a timer showing 53 minutes and 47 seconds. Admiral, Maria whispered into her radio, we have 47 blocks of C4 wired in a daisy-chain configuration with military-grade timing devices. This setup would level everything within a 2-mile radius. Can you disarm it? Maria studied the bomb through the porthole, her trained eye tracing the wire patterns and connection points. It was sophisticated work, the kind that required years of experience to create and just as much experience to safely disarm. Her hands, hidden in the darkness, trembled slightly. Sir, she said, her voice steady despite the fear racing through her veins. I can try, but if my hands shake at the wrong moment... She didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone listening knew what would happen if she made a mistake. The explosion would be instantaneous, and the Coast Guard boat still floating nearby would be vaporized along with her. But as Maria prepared to enter the cargo hold, she heard something that changed everything. Footsteps on the deck behind her, moving with military precision, and a voice speaking English with a distinctly American accent. Well, looks like the Navy sent us a present. Maria spun around to find herself facing 3 men in dark clothing, their faces obscured by night vision goggles. But their stance, their gear, their coordination, everything about them screamed professional military training. You know, the leader continued, pulling off his goggles to reveal a face Maria recognized from her years in EOD training. When we heard they were sending someone to stop us, we expected their best. Instead, they sent the cleaning lady, former Navy Commander James Morrison, Maria's old instructor, the man who'd taught her everything she knew about explosives, and now apparently the man behind the biggest terrorist plot to hit American soil since 9/11. The timer in the cargo hold continued counting down, 51 minutes and 38 seconds, and Maria Santos realized that everything she thought she knew about this mission had just changed. Morrison, Maria breathed, the name carrying 8 years of history between them. I should have known. Her former instructor smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, the star pupil who never knew when to quit. Still trying to be the hero, I see. The other 2 men flanked Morrison with practiced precision. Maria recognized the type, former military, probably discharged under less than honorable circumstances, the kind of soldiers who turned their skills against the country they'd once sworn to protect. 49 minutes, Morrison said, glancing at his watch. You know, Santos, I always wondered what broke you. What made the great Maria Santos give up bomb disposal for mopping floors? Now I think I understand. Maria's mind raced, calculating distances, assessing threats, looking for any advantage. But her focus kept returning to the timer counting down in the cargo hold behind her, 48 minutes until Norfolk became a crater. You were always too dedicated, Morrison continued, circling her slowly. Too willing to sacrifice yourself for others. I heard about Afghanistan. Threw yourself on a bomb to save some civilians, didn't you? Damaged your hands in the process. How do you know about... Because I've been watching, Santos. Watching and waiting. You think it's a coincidence that you ended up at Norfolk? That you got assigned to clean the very corridors where sensitive intelligence passes through daily? The pieces clicked into place with horrible clarity. Maria's assignment hadn't been random. Morrison had arranged it, positioning her to observe security patterns, maintenance schedules, patrol routes. He'd been using her as an unwitting intelligence asset for months. The janitor who sees everything but gets noticed by nobody. Morrison laughed. You gave me everything I needed to plan this operation. Guard rotations, security weaknesses, even the schedule showing when the primary EOD teams would be deployed. Maria felt sick. Her months of careful observation, her growing suspicions about security lapses. She'd been looking for threats from the outside while the real enemy had been manipulating her from within. But you made one mistake, she said, buying time while her hands slowly moved toward the equipment on her belt. You taught me too well. Morrison's smile faltered slightly. Meaning? Meaning I know your work, Commander. I can see your signature in that bomb configuration. The daisy chain pattern, the redundant timers, the blast pattern optimization. You always were predictable. It was a calculated insult designed to get under his skin. Morrison had always been vain about his technical expertise, proud of his innovations in explosive engineering. Maria could see his jaw tighten. Predictable? Morrison stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You think you understand what I've built down there? That's not just C4, Santos. That's a new military-grade compound I've been developing. Twice the explosive force, half the signature. When it detonates, it'll make Oklahoma City look like a firecracker. 46 minutes, why? Maria asked, genuinely needing to understand. Why betray everything we fought for? Morrison's face hardened. Because they threw me away just like they threw you away. 23 years of service, and they forced me into retirement because I questioned orders. Called me unstable, unreliable. So I decided to show them just how unreliable I could be. His words hit too close to home. Maria understood the pain of feeling discarded, of having years of dedicated service reduced to a single moment of perceived failure. But understanding didn't mean accepting. You're wrong about one thing, Maria said, her voice growing stronger. I wasn't thrown away. I chose my assignment. I chose to be here, Morrison laughed. Right. You chose to become a janitor. I chose to investigate. Maria's statement hung in the air like a thunderclap. 6 months ago, I started noticing irregularities in base security. Too many coincidences, too many convenient timing issues. I requested the cleaning assignment because it gave me access to observe everything without being noticed. The confidence on Morrison's face wavered. You're lying. Check your intelligence reports, Commander. Check how many security breaches I reported through proper channels. Check how many routine maintenance issues I flagged for security review. Maria took a step forward. I've been hunting you for 3 months. I just never suspected it was my own instructor. Morrison's two accomplices exchanged nervous glances. This wasn't going according to their plan. They'd expected to capture a broken-down former EOD specialist, not someone who'd been actively investigating their operation. Doesn't matter, Morrison said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Even if you suspected something, you're here alone. No backup, no support team. And in 44 minutes, none of this will matter anyway. Maria smiled for the first time since boarding the ship. Actually, Morrison, that's where you're wrong again. She pressed a button on her radio, activating the emergency beacon she'd carried but never mentioned to the command center. Within seconds, the night exploded with activity. Coast Guard cutters emerged from the darkness, their searchlights turning night into day. Helicopters thundered overhead, and the water around the cargo ship churned with the wake of military vessels. You see? Maria continued as Morrison and his men spun around in shock. The one thing my months of cleaning taught me was patience. I've been building a case against someone inside the base for weeks. I just needed them to make their move. Morrison's face contorted with rage. Doesn't matter. Even if they board this ship, they'll never disarm the bomb in time. That timer has anti-tamper devices that will detonate the charges if anyone tries to interfere. Anyone except the person who taught you everything you know about explosives, Maria replied. The next few minutes unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance of violence and precision. Morrison's men opened fire as Coast Guard boarding teams hit the deck from 3 different directions. Maria used the chaos to sprint toward the cargo hold, dodging bullets and leaping over obstacles with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent years in combat zones. The cargo hold was even worse than she'd glimpsed through the porthole. The bomb was a masterpiece of destructive engineering, with enough redundancies and fail-safes to challenge even the most experienced EOD specialist. Wires ran in patterns that seemed almost artistic, connecting timer devices, pressure sensors, and motion detectors in a web of potential death. 41 minutes. Maria knelt beside the primary timer, pulling out tools she hadn't used in 6 months. Her hands shook, not from nerve damage but from the adrenaline that came with defusing a bomb capable of leveling half of Virginia. Santos. Morrison's voice echoed through the hold as he stumbled in, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead. The Coast Guard had overwhelmed his men, but he'd escaped in the confusion. Get away from that device. Can't do that, Morrison, Maria replied without looking up. She was studying the wire configuration, her trained eye tracing the connections and identifying the proper sequence for disarmament. Too many good people are counting on me. Morrison raised a pistol, his hand trembling with rage and desperation. I'll detonate it manually if I have to. I won't let you stop this. Go ahead, Maria said, her voice calm as she began working on the first connection. Pull that trigger, and you'll create a spark that sets off the charges immediately. We'll both die, but so will you. Is your revenge worth your own life? Morrison hesitated, and in that moment of uncertainty, Maria made her move. Years of training and combat experience kicked in as she dove sideways, rolled behind a support beam, and came up with her own sidearm drawn. It's over, Morrison, she called out. Coast Guard has control of the ship. Your men are in custody. Surrender now, and at least you'll live to see a trial. The response was a gunshot that sent sparks flying from metal near her head. Morrison had chosen his path. 38 minutes. What followed was a deadly game of cat and mouse among the cargo containers and bomb components. Morrison knew the layout better, but Maria had spent years learning to think 3 moves ahead under pressure. She used the ship's configuration against him, forcing him into positions where his shots could accidentally damage the very bomb he was trying to protect. The end came suddenly. Morrison, desperate and cornered, made a fatal mistake. He fired a shot that ricocheted off a metal beam and struck one of his own timer devices. Sparks flew, and one of the secondary charges began smoking. No, Morrison screamed, running toward the damaged device. Maria was faster. She reached the smoking timer first. Her hands moving with the precision that had made her legendary. Nerve damage or not, muscle memory took over. She identified the disrupted circuit, traced it to its source, and made the cut that isolated the damaged component from the main system. 35 minutes. Morrison stood frozen, watching as the woman he'd tried to destroy systematically began dismantling his life's work. Each wire she cut, each connection she isolated, undid months of careful planning and preparation. How? He whispered. Your hands? The nerve damage. Maria looked up at him, her hands steady as rocks as she worked. You want to know the truth about my hands, Morrison? There was never any permanent nerve damage. The doctors cleared me for full duty 2 weeks after the incident in Afghanistan. Morrison's face went white. But your assignment? Why would you? Because I was tired of the glory, Maria said, returning to her work. Tired of being the hero who defused the bomb and got the medal. I wanted to serve quietly, to be useful without needing recognition. And when I started noticing security problems, I realized my assignment gave me the perfect cover to investigate. 30 minutes. The bomb was complex, but Maria had learned from the master himself. Every technique Morrison had taught her, every innovation he'd shared, she now turned against his creation. One by one, she isolated the circuits, disabled the fail-safes, and unwove the web of destruction he'd spent months creating. 20 minutes, Coast Guard officers flooded into the cargo hold, weapons drawn. They found Morrison sitting against a bulkhead, staring in defeat as his former student methodically dismantled his masterpiece. 15 minutes. Santos, came Admiral Harrison's voice through her radio. What's your status? Almost finished, sir, Maria replied, sweat beading on her forehead as she made the final connections. Primary charges neutralized, secondary systems isolated. Just need to disable the master timer. 10 minutes. The master timer was Morrison's final challenge, a device so sensitive that the slightest mistake would trigger immediate detonation. But as Maria studied its configuration, she recognized something that made her smile. You know what your real mistake was, Morrison? She called out as Coast Guard officers secured him in restraints. What? He asked bitterly. You taught me to always put a hidden safety switch in my designs, something only the builder would know about. Maria's fingers found a concealed panel on the timer's housing, just in case something went wrong. Morrison's eyes widened as he realized what she'd discovered. You can't know about that. I never told anyone. You didn't have to, Maria interrupted. I've been watching you work for 8 years. I know your patterns, your habits, your signature touches, including the fact that you're too paranoid to build a bomb without a secret way to shut it down. She pressed the hidden switch. The timer stopped at 7 minutes and 43 seconds. The silence that followed was deafening. Then slowly, the cargo hold filled with the sound of men breathing again, of hearts that had stopped pounding. of voices raised in relief and amazement. Maria Santos, the woman they'd called a washed-up janitor, had just saved thousands of lives using skills she'd never lost and determination that 6 months of mockery couldn't break. 2 weeks later, Maria stood in dress uniform before Admiral Harrison in the same command center where it had all begun. The same officers who'd laughed at her were present, but the atmosphere had changed completely. Staff Sergeant Santos, Admiral Harrison began, his voice carrying the weight of ceremony. Your actions aboard the Maria Estrella prevented what could have been the greatest terrorist attack in American history. Your dedication to duty, your courage under fire, and your extraordinary skill have earned you the Navy Cross. As the medal was pinned to her uniform, Maria could see faces in the crowd she recognized. Jenkins, who'd made jokes about her fall from grace, now looked at her with something approaching awe. Rodriguez, who'd suggested she become a housekeeper, couldn't meet her eyes. Commander Peterson, who'd questioned her fitness for duty, stared at the floor. But Maria's attention was drawn to Chief Petty Officer Martinez, who stood at attention with tears in his eyes. He understood what real service looked like, and he was proud to serve alongside someone who'd sacrificed recognition for the greater good. Furthermore, Admiral Harrison continued, I'm pleased to inform you that you've been selected to head the Navy's new counterterrorism EOD division. Your first assignment will be training the next generation of bomb disposal specialists. The room erupted in applause, not the polite, obligatory clapping of military ceremony, but the genuine respect of people who'd witnessed greatness and finally recognized it. After the ceremony, as officers lined up to shake her hand and offer congratulations, Jenkins approached nervously. Ma'am, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, I owe you an apology. We all do. We had no idea. Maria held up a hand. Petty Officer Jenkins, you treated me the way I appeared to be. Nothing wrong with that. But maybe next time remember that appearances can be deceiving. Jenkins nodded gratefully. Yes, ma'am. And for what it's worth, I'll never underestimate the cleaning crew again. Maria smiled. Good. Because the person mopping your floors today might be the one saving your life tomorrow. As the crowd dispersed and the command center returned to its normal operations, Maria looked out through the windows at Norfolk Naval Base. Ships moved in the harbor. Sailors went about their duties and families slept safely in their homes. They'd never know how close they'd come to disaster, and they'd never know that their salvation had come from a woman they'd dismissed as just another face in the crowd. But Maria knew, and that was enough. 6 months of mockery had ended with a moment of triumph that would define her legacy forever. The woman who'd been just mopping the base had proven that heroism isn't about the uniform you wear or the title on your door. It's about being ready when your moment comes, regardless of whether anyone expects greatness from you. Maria Santos had always been a hero. It just took a crisis for everyone else to see it. And as she walked out of the command center, heading back to her new office and her new responsibilities, Maria carried with her the knowledge that sometimes the greatest victories come not from proving others wrong, but from proving yourself right. The janitor had become a legend, but she'd been legendary all along.